I just would like to thank everyone for attending today. And this is our final, excuse me, the final webinar in the 2019 webinar series. So I know some of you have been with us for every webinar, which is fantastic. And thank you for joining us every month. Some of you have just been able to come here and there, and it appears as though there's still a couple that this is your first webinar. So all of the webinars have been recorded, and they are posted on the EZSigma YouTube website or webpage. And today's webinar is also being recorded and will be uploaded as well. So definitely feel free to review the webinar, share them. They're there as a resource for you, and if you ever have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out. So for today, you can see we're dealing with kind of closing the project, especially as we're coming to the end of the year. We thought it would be appropriate. Your facilitator today will be Jeff Woods, who's been facilitating all of these webinars so far. But as far as EZSigma, again, for those of you that are not as familiar with us, we just wanted to include a little bit about our vision, our mission. We're very passionate about continuous improvement and about organizations and people becoming more efficient, because overall what that does is it reduces stress. When people aren't stressed out looking for things or fixing things or trying to get the information they need, it makes work function easier, and it helps us to be more productive as individuals, and also to feel more satisfied with what we do. So there's definitely a lot of benefits to continuous improvement, both in our professional lives and in our personal lives. As mentioned, Jeff Woods is our facilitator. He's got a wealth of experience in all different industries. He also does a lot of our corporate training and our open enrollment programs. He is the facilitator for that. So definitely you are in good hands this afternoon. So just before I hand it over to Jeff, I'm going to ask everyone just to put your phones on mute to prevent any background noise from coming in and distracting or taking away from us being able to hear Jeff very well. So without further ado, Jeff, I will pass the floor to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Liz. So again, Jeff Woods, and I'll be the first in taking you through today's journey. And we want to talk about project selection. So in the beginning, kind of choosing your project, a little bit in the middle around kind of how do we go about it. So we're going to talk about the A3 format for managing your project, and then ending up with how we close out our project. So we're going to do a little bit of the bookends today as we go through it. So I started with build the case for change, and this can be when you're looking at, overall, how do you sort of initiate lean or continuous improvement in your organization, or it could be for a specific change that you're trying to make. But it's really important about, we've spent other time talking about managing change and teams, et cetera, but we'll talk a little bit about kind of that overarching direction that you need to take. So, you need to have people that are believing in the change, that change is necessary. So getting back to, people, happy with the way things are. Do you have that burning platform in place in your organization, and, sort of the right conditions for change? So people, do they feel that if we do change, this is going to be better for them? Is the reason compelling and motivating? Can I see the benefit for me? It kind of gets back to the WIFM idea of what's in it for me. People will always look at whatever's going on and then sort of step back and say, okay, so they want to do this, but what does this mean to me? How am I going to be impacted? And there's lots of different ways of how people can be viewing change and where they see it, and different kind of resistors that they may have. But you kind of want to at least understand why we're doing it and where we're going. As I get into it, as usual, if you ever have any questions, please go ahead and jump in. We will have questions at the end and every once in a while, I'll just sort of pause and give people an opportunity to jump in if they want. you don't have to say, I don't have any questions. I always take silence as good to go ahead. So I may pause from time to time as we go through the next few minutes and go through the slides. So it starts by, again, what does change look like? And we have a couple of tools that we can use to help us focus and think about our strategy of approach. So the first one is a threat and opportunity matrix. And it really helps us understand, well, why is this project or whatever we're working on necessary? So you can look at listing out the consequences if the problem isn't fixed and the benefits of making the change. And we kind of build that out from what's the short-term and long-term impact to the organization, because it can kind of start to give us some good anchors of what we want to be thinking about around the change. So this is kind of just a simple template, but it really gets us to sort of write things down. So if we don't change in the short term, what are the threats to the organization? What's the downside? And what's the opportunity? Ideally, when we look at that burning platform, so that burning platform says, can't stay where we are. And ideally, it's because if we move forward, we have an opportunity to make things even better, to grow the organization, to get into new markets, to develop new products on the positive side, or it can be a threat because somebody else is doing it or somebody else is moving into our space, and there are threats, negatively around, the growth of our organization and all the things that can mean. So you sort of want to look at it from the, both sides of the coin. What are the threats if we don't change, and what are the opportunities if we do? And look at it through the lens of the short term, because people kind of can see what does that mean for us now, and also, what's that long-term vision? Because sometimes a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain can be a good motivator for people too. They need to understand, kind of getting back to that whole resistance model around the satisfaction with the current state, a vision of where we're going, and an understanding of the first steps that's going to get us there. So you want to be thinking about how can we be approaching this? And again, whether this is from a organizational perspective of implementing lean, or whether this is a particular project or area of the business that we want to be working on. Once we have that idea of the threats and opportunity, which talks about the why, we can get around thinking about, well, how do we sort of go at that? How can we influence people? And so we have what we call our 3Ds analysis, where we look at data, demonstration, and demand. Are, again, 3 different lenses that we can look at the issue. And so again, in this particular case, how can we leverage what we want to do based on, what's the data telling us, right? Either internally or externally. Who can lead by example? So how can we demonstrate the change? What's going on in the business? Are there other people that are doing things that we need to be catching up, or is there an opportunity for us to, based on what other industries are doing, that we have a chance of sort of moving ahead and capturing new products or new customers, or improving our capacity? We're thinking about more of a healthcare or government situation where, wow, if we make these kind of changes, that's going to really improve our capacity and allow us to provide better service, to give faster results, answers, information to either patients or to our constituents. So it kind of fits in no matter whether we're talking about private sector, public sector, healthcare, wherever. But we want to start to think about, no matter what, people have to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and again, getting back to that wisdom of what's in it for them. So you can look at it through, data, demonstration, and demand as another way of kind of understanding, well, the why behind this and how. Another piece to think about is your elevator speech. So as you're going around the organization, again, whether it's about a particular project, you want to have that kind of succinct way of being able to describe what you're doing, what you're working on, why it's important. And the elevator pitch or elevator speech concept comes from think about you step on the elevator and there's the CEO and he says, hey, what have you been working on? And so you answer to him or her saying, and then just as you finally get it in your own mind, elevator opens, they step off, and you go, missed my chance. And that can be because it's somebody up the organization. It can be you're speaking to a peer about it. It could be an employee asking, hey, I understand you're working on something. Can you tell me more about it? And so you want to have that answer ready. And really, one way of approaching is, again, formatting through a template of thinking where, what are we doing? Why is it important? Where are we at with it, or what have we done so far? And how can you help, right? So maybe it's a way of kind of pulling people in the organization and letting them feel that they're part of that journey, part of the solution. Again, could be that you need someone to help on the sponsorship side, or you're needing to have local support, wherever it's coming from. It's always good to have that elevator speech ready to, in your own mind, talk about what you're talking about and what you're working on. When we're selecting projects, are they linked to our strategies? And again, it's important to be thinking about, you may be working on a very localized, small initiative, but how does that fit into what the organization is trying to achieve? Because no matter what you're doing, you want to be able to see that linkage up through the organization to its strategic goals of what it's trying to do, whether it's improving some capacity, speeding our delivery, reducing our costs, or improving our quality, whatever it is we're working on. You want to be able to see how that lines up. And why that's important is that, on your project, you want people to work on it. And if people are going to work on your project, then, they want to see, the importance of it. So when we're looking at it, again, we want them to be aligned because our objectives and our goals are ambitious. We have no resources. Usually when I'm talking to people in business and I ask them how things are going, rarely do I hear people say, my challenge is I just don't have enough to do. It's often the opposite. The challenge is that we have so much on our plates. We're really busy. We're running from place to place. We're putting out fires. There's all this work on our plate. And so envision that person who's already feeling overwhelmed, and now you're knocking on the door and asking them, hey, do you mind working on my project? I've got this thing to work on. It would be great. So if they can see how it aligns to the organization, then a better chance that they're going to want to work on it. And also, so that helps us get resources. Better alignment makes it easier to get management support up and down it, and helps motivate the teams. Which is why we always say when you're kicking off an event, no matter what the size of it is, if you can have that sponsor come in, say hello, let people know how important it is, then that kind of gives you that sort of jump off to get going. So we think about aligning our projects. And again, remember when we're looking at the organization, and there's lots of different ways of how issues can come about, but when we see problems, we want to make sure that we're thinking about it correctly. Because often what we see are the symptoms, or it's Bob's fault, we're blaming somebody. So if we're going to work on something, we want to make sure that we understand what's the problem I'm trying to solve, and really spend that time up front thinking about what the issue is. So we haven't actually started to work on anything yet. We're still trying to think about what area of the business do we want to work on? What are the various things that we want to do? And again, famous quote from Albert Einstein, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I spent 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. And it goes back to that idea of if I really, really understand what it is I'm trying to solve, then I can be much more prescriptive around the solution that I put in place to solve that particular issue. We want to start from that idea of, what are the things that we can work on? What are the problems that we can solve? And often what happens is within a business, when we start to look at our organization, no matter how great your company is, there's always lots of opportunity for improvement. There's lots of things that we could be doing better. So if we have 1, 10, 100 different ideas, then how do we decide what to work on? So you need to have some sort of, whether simple to more complex, depending on the size, way of evaluating what are the projects that you want to work on and what's important to us. If you don't, what often happens is it becomes the LIFO effect, where it's the loudest in, first out. And that can, so that starts to drive our business by which way the wind's blowing. And we really want to be able to step back and have some sort of criteria that allows us to say, we have all these things that we can work on, but let's work on this one. And this is why we want to do it. So you can have a fairly simple matrix. Again, something around, this is what this list that, from the benefit side, so on the plus side, how's it going to improve costs or customer satisfaction or some other positive criteria. And then a weighting scale of how important each of those are relative to what the business is trying to achieve. And on the kind of negative or the investment side, it's, well, how much money is this going to need to put in? How much time is it going to take to implement? What's the risk profile around? Do we think it's going to be successful? So what are a couple of different things that we want to think about from how good is this, how much is this going to help us, and how hard is it going to be to do? And then I can use that as a scaling and think about, well, what are all the different things we can work on? And where do I think that they line up? And this really gives us an opportunity to think about, well, what do we want to work on? Because once you're starting to work on something, you want to make sure that you take it through to fruition. If we're going to work on a project, we might as well be successful. And one of the symptoms, if you don't have, a good mechanism for what we're going to work on and alignment and agreement within the organization, is you start to have a lot of projects that start and then sort of die in the vine. And then, well, we're working on that, but now I want you to go work on this. And now I want you to go work on something else. And so a whole bunch of investment gets started around looking and changing something, but we don't actually get to the end of the journey and implement something. So if you've ever experienced that in your own organization, you might want to step back and say, well, how are we selecting what we're working on? Do we have a good mechanism for deciding what's important? And what we're going to work on first, then second, then third as we go ahead. And again, it can be a very simple, rudimentary template, or it can get, in this case, more detailed. So typically, the bigger the kind of project it's going to be, up the scale from a localized event to a whole enterprise project where there's going to be a lot of investment in time and capital and in kind of political will, then you want to make sure that you're really understanding, how it's going to work. So once we've figured out what we want to fix, then we want to think about which things do we want to fix in what order. So a selection matrix can really help us understand where we want to spend our time and energy. And then let's drive it through. Let's actually get the results. Let's make the change to the business and move it forward. Again, from a simplistic, what you're trying to do is try to understand, right? Investment score to benefit score. So, if it's easy to do, but doesn't really give you any benefits, then, that's just kind of busy work. Low benefits, high investment, so that it's costing us a lot to do it, a lot of time, but really it's not going to make a value, then that's not a good thing. High benefits, low investment, that's fantastic. High benefits, high investment are those, they typically become those longer enterprise type of projects. Excuse me. But again, you just want to have some way of kind of gauging it and getting agreement so that the organization, right, that we're in the boat, we're all rowing in the same direction. We're not kind of just, well, let's go over here, then go over there, not jumping all over the place. And again, how I see that often is that, projects just kind of wither out and something else starts up, then something else starts up. And so we're putting all the time and energy into it, but we're never taking it through to fruition where we're actually getting the results and the benefits back to the organization. Which is sometimes in your organization where you'll see where they're going, oh, you know what, this continuous improvement thing is it's just a lot of work with no benefit. Well, that's because we're not taking it all the way through. What we want to do is we want to make a change, make that the new way that we do things, the new standard, capture that gain, and again, whether that gains in capacity, cost, quality, market share, whatever it is that we're trying to improve, make that the new current state instead of new target state, and make that the new current state. So continually improve and move forward. And in summary, if you think about from a continuous improvement perspective, there's lots of different places that projects can come from and ideas can come from. It could come from, customer complaints or employee suggestions. It could come from the fact that we're measuring our metrics today and our metrics are off, right? And so that's driving change. We'll talk about control charts and things. Maybe that's driving the change. Or strategically, the executive could be looking at, where are we today versus where we need to be in the future. And so strategically, they could be launching projects. So you want to look at kind of where they all come from. And again, once we understand the problem and prioritize it, they can, present themselves as everything from localized Kaizen events to larger enterprise projects to workplace organization events. So lots of different ways that we can solve it. It's not bring the same hammer to every party. We want to put the right kind of process in place depending on what we're actually trying to improve. So before I move on, it's going to pause for a second if anyone has any questions up to now. And if I greeted with silence then I will just continue on. Fantastic. So if we think about it, we gather all the information, we prepare that we want to work on a project, and the vessel that holds all the initial documentation is the charter, right? And so that charter talks about, what are we trying to do and what's the benefit of it, what's the metric, who's on the team, and getting that sign off. So we've got, what's the voice of the customer. So all of the different components that we've gathered up in our sort of opportunity statement, problem statement, get wrapped around the charter, which then sort of starts our journey. And when we're on our journey to improvement, we want to, again, have a methodology or approach that we follow. And, our typical sort of overarching strategy is around define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And within that, there's a couple of other ways that we can approach it. So in this case, we want to talk about the A3 report, or kind of as a mechanism or a vessel to sort of take us to our project. Again, so an A3 report comes out of Toyota, and the beauty behind it is it becomes, in its purest sense, becomes a one-page document. So you've got that snapshot component that you can put up on the wall, and it tells the journey of the project. It really, whether we're talking about Stewart's Plan, Do, Study, Act, or Plan, Do, Check Act, really still sits underneath the lining of DMAIC, because we're looking here at, definition of the problem, defining what's the problem I'm trying to solve, right? What's causing it to happen? So what's the measurement side? And analyzing what we can do about it. What solutions do I want to put in place? And then how do we make sure that it actually works? So how do we control or study it to make sure that it actually made the change that we thought? So it becomes, we're still walking through the same ideas, but it becomes a nice, distinct way of kind of, in a snapshot, people can pretty quickly understand what's going on, and it's a great communication tool. It's sort of an alternative to the DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control, which is, in my mind, they all kind of, you're asking yourself the same questions, but, in a more rigorous DMAIC project, ideally you're looking at having at each step your toll gate and check-in, because what did we learn in the define stage of the project? Okay, based on that, how are we going to go through the measure stage? What did we learn in the measure stage? and your toll gate. And again, toll gate being your check-in with your sponsor and saying, well, here's what we learned, so here's what we want to do in the analyze phase. Toll gate, here are the things that we want to improve, and here's our sort of strategy of what solutions we want to put in place. Let's verify it, and how do we control it? So again, not that we don't ask ourselves these questions. The value and the beauty of the methodology is that it's making it more overt. It's having you kind of go through and ask the right questions at the right time and know what to do with the answers. And so it sort of takes you through what do you need to know so that you can continue to build on that to get to an improved state. Getting back to the A3, again, comes out of Toyota, and really the A3 stands for A3 size paper or B size paper, which is the 11 by 17 size, because that's what they popularized using to put their journey on. So in a one-pager, you could sort of see what was the problem I was trying to solve, what's the problem, why was it a problem, what solutions did we put in place, what was the improvement, how are we going to make sure we stabilize it. Again, if we think about it from a methodology approach, again, you can see that it's very similar, right? Whether it's plan, do, study, act, or plan, do, check, act, or define, measure, analyze, improve, control. It takes us through. What's the problem I'm trying to solve? Right? Understand that current situation. What's my problem statement? Why is it a problem? What are the X's or the inputs to the process that are causing the issues that we're having with the output? What does the future look like? What could I do to mitigate those X's? What changes could I put in place? How am I going to do that? What's my implementation plan? How am I going to know that it actually worked? So what's my follow-up plan to make sure that we understand it? Did I make sure we communicated appropriately so that everybody knew what we were doing, when we were doing it, how we were doing it, why we're doing it? Do we have alignment up the organization so there's approval wherever that's necessary to make sure that we're not going offside to kind of the strategies of the organization? Then we implement it and evaluate the results. So again, it's very similar to the idea behind DMAIC. It just kind of, think of it as we do the same thinking, but maybe not to the same level of degree, because we want to be fast enough to make quick changes. So it comes back to that idea of the right touch. So what's the amount of effort and sort of methodology necessary to keep it on side going through whatever level of change we're trying to make. This is where we've actually taken the idea of it, and rather than it be on one sheet of paper, we have it in a Word document. Many of you would have seen this if you've taken some of our courses, but we're really going through the same thing. We're asking people to find the issue. What's the problem? Why is it a problem? Identify the root causes. What's the future state look like? So what does it look like if we improve it? So what are the metrics? What's the gap between the current state of how it's performing versus how it should be performing? So what are we trying to improve? What's the impact of the organization? What solutions are we going to put in place so that works? And then what's our Gantt chart, or what's our action plan to get that? Who's going to do what when to actually have this thing come through, so we can track it and keep it top of mind to make sure that we're moving forward. Because one of the challenges with projects often is that we get off track with what we're doing, and sort of the fire of the day takes over. So we want to have a good plan of action so we can track to make sure we're moving forward and not having the project kind of wither on the vine. And then once we put it in place, let's measure it. Let's make sure that it worked. If it didn't give us the results we wanted, let's understand why, and let's make additional changes. Or if it did, then how do we make sure we sustain it? And in the fine print, which you probably can't read on the screen, it's suggested tools that you could be using at each of those stages as you go through your project. So the A3 is really a nice, it's like a journey map. And it's a vessel that holds that project journey from initiation of what problem I'm trying to solve right through to what am I trying to do, what am I going to do about it, what did I put in place, the metrics that I tracked, and how are we going to make sure we sustain it. So in sustaining it really talks about, well, how do we make sure it stays in the state that we want it to from a performance perspective. Here we have another kind of layout option. And again, this one kind of goes back to, you can have this printed on one page where what's the background, current situation, goal, why is it happening, or what's my analysis? You know, what are the recommendations, or what are we hoping to achieve? What's the future state? The plan, again, how are we going to do it? And then how are we going to follow up to make sure it stays that way? So there's a number of different kind of ways of approaching it, but it's a really nice way to sort of tell a consistent story. And again, whatever you use for storyboards or talking about projects, well, and hopefully you do talk about improvement projects in your organization. And if you use a consistent template, then it's easy to put these up on a wall and have kind of your continuous improvement wall along in your organization. And because they all look the same, what's changed in each one is what we're doing and what the results were, but the journey stays the same. So it makes it easier for people to understand and to see the impact of change over time in the company. So when we talked about sustaining, right? So that becomes, once we have that, how are we going to keep it in place? So how do we close out our project? And, you know, I'm looking at that from a control plan perspective. Again, what we want to do is, you know, where are we at with the projects that we've implemented a change, we've improved our metrics, and we want to make sure that our metrics stay that way. And, you know, the sort of the depth and rigor around our control plan really depends on kind of the size and complexity of the problem that we solved. You know, they can be quite detailed in understanding, you know, gauge R&R tests and doing a whole bunch of analytical work, or it can be as simple as, you know what, if the metric starts to change, here's the escalation plan of how I deal with it. But you want to have a consistent plan so that as things get, if they go out of whack, that there's a plan left behind for that process owner to know, well, what do I do about it? Right? How do I make sure that we get it back in line again? So we're trying to link the control plan back to what the process is and making sure that we're getting the results. So if we're tracking it and we're seeing a change in our metrics, then that control plan should really be telling us, well, what do you do about it? It's a recipe for getting things back on track. So a couple different pieces within it, those characteristics. And again, it can be quite detailed in the standards that we're sort of tracking, the methods, the response plan, can be more or less detailed depending on what process I'm actually looking at, whether it's a complex process for delivering or creating an engine to a rocket ship, or whether it's a change to how we control getting results in our customer care center. So, you know, it can work in any different forms. But really, it's a matter of kind of the administrative section, kind of what's going on, what's our plan, how are we measuring it, you know, what's our control chart, or what metrics are we looking at, and how does that relay back to what our SOPs or standard operating procedures are, what's our plan in case we have an issue, and how do we approach it? So how do we get it back on track? You know, whether it's as simply call back the continuous improvement office, or it gives you escalation of when you escalate to somebody else to get things back on track. So lots of different ways that we can have it, but you always want to have some sort of plan in place so that whoever owns that process has a recipe for keeping things the way that we want to now see the current state in the organization. And really that sort of takes us through from what kind of projects are we selecting, right? And how do we select it, and criteria that we can use to make sure that we're working on the right things and everybody agrees this is what we're going to work on, and let's take them through to fruition. If we're going to do that, what kind of journey are we going to use, whether it's DMAIC, A3, as a way of kind of how we hold the vessel of our project, and we kind of track ourselves as we go through the define, measure, analyze, improve, control stages of it. And then once we've improved it, how do we make sure that we kind of have that in place when we finish our project? Let's make sure that we validated it, have it signed off, that we look for lessons learned, and then celebrate, right? Always celebrate your successes. I think one of the things that companies don't do enough of is pause and celebrate. And that can be 10 seconds. Yay, woohoo. Okay, let's get back to work. But let's recognize the moment. Let's learn from how it can be better for next time. Let's celebrate it, and then let's move on to the next improvement. So when we're looking at projects, think lean, talk about, Muda, the 8 lenses or the 8 ways of how we do things, understand process variation, where's the gap between how well the process is performing versus how well it's supposed to perform. From a capability perspective, what's the voice of the processes, which is how well it's working, versus the voice of the customer, which is what they actually, need and want. And so let's understand how we can reduce that variation. We work through things by having great problem statements. Do we understand what we're trying to fix? Because if we just go running in going, let's fix something, go fix accounting. What is it about accounting that's broken? What are we trying to fix? How are we going to approach it? As we work through it, the A3 problem solving and DMAIC methodologies of working through it, the tools and principles, managing change. Again, we're not talking about that today, but that whole idea of how do we set ourselves up for success? What's that human side of it? Because there's 2 pieces. There's having a better solution, and there's actually being able to implement it and have it be successfully the new way we do things. And having a great solution and not getting it implemented doesn't help the organization. And then finally, as I said before, enjoy the journey and celebrate your successes. We might as well have fun making things better. And, it's so much our attitude of how we approach things at work. And we're all lucky that typically work for fantastic organizations that want to even be better. And how can each of us help us move forward? So that kind of takes us through it, again, because, this slide is because it's, the end of the year and the end of this season's webinars that we've had starting back in January through to December. Is this the end of the season's webinars, or is this the beginning of our journey? So think about yourself and what you're going to do next in your personal life, at work. Kind of how do we take the ideas, the tools, the concepts, and apply it to our thinking and make that cultural change in how we approach everything. So really that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, and then bringing it through to the end. I'm going to open it up for questions. And again, what I'll do is I'll pause. You don't have to come on the line and say, I don't have any questions. I'll take silence as no questions. From time to time, people will have put in some questions through the online. So I'll have Liz can speak up if anyone has brought anything up. And meanwhile, let's just think about this for a minute, and I'll come back.
Thank you, Jeff. So just as everyone is reflecting on all the information over the past 40 minutes, just wanted to thank you again for joining us this year for the webinar series and for joining us today. We are looking at doing another series next year in 2020, but as far as just any kind of training or consulting is concerned, there are always different options available to you through e-learning, on-site corporate training, open enrollment. And for those of you that are considering the public courses, there is a Boxing Day sale coming up, so do keep your eyes out for that. But as mentioned for the 2020 webinar series, we are looking similar types of schedule, second Wednesday, perhaps next year of the month instead of Thursdays. And some of the topics that we've received feedback on are listed on your computer right now. So if there are any other topics that are of particular interest to you, please let us know. You can email me directly or email us through the website. But I'm going to open the floor up again in case anyone did have any questions about project closure, selection, or A3 reporting.
Well, I just want to wish everyone a happy holiday season, given that it is mid-December, and I hope that everyone has a great sort of close out to their calendar year, and wish everyone health and happiness in 2020 as we sort of jump on. And I look forward to speaking to many of you in the future. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.